Imagine a city where the noise suddenly stops. The carts do not roll. The church bells do not ring. The markets are empty. In the silence, you expect to see nothing. But when you look at the walls of the church, you see something new. You see skeletons dancing with kings. You see death holding hands with a peasant. This is not a nightmare. This is history speaking through paint. This is how humanity survives when the world falls apart. Welcome to London Gritty Chronicles. Today, we are not just learning history, we are learning how to read the scars of the past. We are exploring how art, songs, and symbols help us process collective trauma. Collective trauma is a key phrase. It means a terrible event that is shared by a whole group of people, like a war, a plague, or a fire. It is not just your pain. It is everyone's pain. And when the pain is too big for words, we turn to symbols. By the end of this series, you will understand history better, but you will also have a sharper command of the English language. You will learn to interpret tone, metaphors, and motifs. You will learn the difference between a literal record and a cultural response. These are powerful tools for advanced English speakers. Let us begin our journey in the shadow of the greatest catastrophe of the Middle Ages. The year is 1348. A ship arrives in a port in the south of England. The sailors are sick. Within weeks, the sickness is everywhere. We call it the Black Death. Historians estimate that between 30 and 50% of the population died. Think about that number. 1 out of every 2 people you know. Gone. At the time, people did not have the science to understand bacteria. They did not know what a flea was doing to their blood. They only knew fear. They looked for an explanation. They looked to the sky. They looked to the church. But the prayers did not stop the dying. The silence of the city was heavy. In English, we might describe this atmosphere as oppressive. Oppressive means weighing heavily on the mind or spirit. The air felt heavy with death. When reality becomes this dark, the human mind struggles. It cannot process the sheer scale of the loss. This is where art steps in. It functions as a container. It holds the emotions that are too dangerous to touch directly. In the years following the plague, a strange new image began to appear on church walls across Europe and England. It was called the Danse Macabre, or the Dance of Death. Picture a long line of figures. At the front, there is a pope wearing his tall hat. Next to him, a king with a golden crown. Then a merchant with his money bag. Then a laborer with his tools. And finally, a child. But between each of them, holding their hands, is a skeleton. The skeletons are grinning. They are dancing. They are pulling the living toward the grave. This image is a motif. A motif is a recurring subject, theme, or idea in an artistic work. The motif here is the equality of death. In a society that was strictly divided by class, where a king was seen as almost divine and a peasant was seen as nothing, this art was shocking. It delivered a clear message. Death comes for everyone. No amount of gold can bribe it. No crown can stop it. For an English learner, looking at this art requires understanding allegory. An allegory is a story or picture that can be interpreted to reveal a hidden meaning, usually a moral or political one. The skeletons are not literal monsters. They are an allegory for the inevitability of our end. They tell the viewer, that life is fragile. Why do they paint this? It seems gruesome. Gruesome means causing repulsion or horror. You might think people would want to forget the plague, but they painted it on the walls where they prayed. This tells us something profound about human psychology. By painting death, they were trying to control it. They were taking the invisible terror, the bacteria, the fever, the sudden collapse, and giving it a shape. If you can draw it, you can see it. If you can see it, you are not helpless. The tone of these paintings is complex. Tone refers to the attitude or emotion conveyed by the work. Is the tone sad? Yes, but it is also satirical. Satire is the use of humor or exaggeration to criticize people's stupidity or vices. The skeletons often look like they are mocking the wealthy merchant. They seem to say, "You thought your money mattered. Look at you now." This was a way for the survivors to cope with their anger. They were angry that the rich could flee to the countryside while the poor died in the cities. But in the end, the dance of death showed them all in the same line. It provided a sense of dark justice. As we move through history, we will see this pattern repeat. A catastrophe strikes. Silence follows. Then, slowly, the art emerges to make sense of the ruin. But not all art is about skeletons and satire. Sometimes, the trauma is so hot, so burning, that it wipes the city clean of its old identity entirely. Sometimes the art is not a painting, but a building. 300 years after the Black Death, London faced a different kind of apocalypse. This time, it was not a silent sickness. It was a roaring noise. It was heat. It was the color orange eating the night sky. The Great Fire of London in 1666 did not just destroy houses. It destroyed the memory of the medieval city. It erased the physical past. Imagine standing on the south bank of the River Thames on a Sunday evening in September. You look across the water. The horizon is glowing. The smell of burning wood and melting lead fills your nose. The fire is moving faster than a man can run. It is consuming the wooden timeline of history. When the smoke finally cleared, the citizens of London had to decide how to remember this event. They could have written a list of the lost houses. That would be a literal record. A literal record deals with facts, numbers, and dates. It is like a police report. It tells you what happened. But a list of burned houses does not capture the feeling of watching your world turn to ash. It does not capture the collective trauma. So, they built something else. They built a giant stone column that still stands today. But this column was not just a marker. It was a puzzle. It changed its meaning depending on who looked at it. To understand the difference between a literal record and a cultural response, we must look closely at how this new city rose from the ashes. We must look at the man who was tasked with rebuilding it, Sir Christopher Wren. He had a vision. He wanted to use architecture to heal the mind of the city. He wanted to replace the chaotic, dark, wooden alleys of the past with order, light, and stone. But before we walk through his new city, we have to understand the immediate aftermath. The fire stopped, but the fear did not. The people needed a scapegoat. A scapegoat is a person or group who is unfairly blamed for something that others have done or for a disaster. Who started the fire? Was it an accident? Or was it an attack? The way London answered that question shaped the art and the monuments for centuries. It shows us that memory is not a fixed thing like a rock. Memory is flexible. It can be molded like clay. And sometimes, the story we tell ourselves about a tragedy is more important than the truth of what actually happened. In the next part, we will walk up the steps of the monument to the Great Fire. We will read the inscriptions that were carved into the stone. We will see how they changed over time as the anger faded and the city healed. We will discover how a simple pillar of stone became a battleground for the truth. And we will ask a difficult question. When a city is destroyed, should we rebuild it exactly as it was, to honor the memory? Or should we build something better, to honor the future? The answer lies in the difference between nostalgia and resilience. Resilience is the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. It is toughness. London chose resilience, but it came at a cost. Listen for the echoes of the fire in the next episode. We will see how the heat of 1666 forged a new English identity, and how the language of architecture became the language of power. If you lay the monument to the Great Fire of London flat on the ground, it points to exactly one spot. It measures exactly 202 feet tall. And if you measure 202 feet away from its base, you land on the site of a small, ordinary bakery on Pudding Lane. This is where the fire started. It began with a spark in a baker's oven, a simple accident. But when you look at the base of the monument, the story gets complicated. For many years, the writing on the stone did not say accident. It told a different story. It blamed the fire on a popish frenzy, accusing Catholics of deliberately burning the city. This was a lie, but for the people of 1666, the lie felt more true than the accident. This brings us to a crucial distinction in English and history, the difference between a literal record and a cultural response. A literal record is the police report. A spark set fire to some dry wood. It is dry, factual, and emotionless. A cultural response is the story the society tells itself to make sense of the pain. The enemy attacked us is a cultural response. It gives the people a target for their anger. It makes the random chaos of the world feel like it has a villain. On the monument, the words carved into the rock are called an inscription. An inscription is text that is cut or engraved into a hard surface. For over 150 years, this inscription stood as a public record. It was not removed until 1830. This teaches us that monuments are not always history books. They are often mirrors of the people who built them. They reflect the fears and the prejudices of the time. In English, we might say the inscription was biased. Biased means unfairly prejudiced for or against someone or something. When you read historical texts, you must always look for bias. You must ask, who wrote this? Why are they angry? What are they trying to protect? While the monument looked back in anger, another building looked forward with hope. The architect, Sir Christopher Wren, was given the impossible job of rebuilding St. Paul's Cathedral. The old cathedral was a ruin. Its roof had melted. It was a skeleton of stone. There is a famous story, an anecdote, about the rebuilding. An anecdote is a short, interesting story about a real incident or person. As Wren was surveying the ruins, he asked a workman to bring him a flat stone to mark a spot on the ground. The workman brought a broken piece of a gravestone from the rubble. On it was a single Latin word, resurgam. In In English, this means, I shall rise again. For Wren, and for the people of London, this was not just a coincidence. It was a sign. It became a metaphor for the city itself. A metaphor is a figure of speech that describes an object or action in a way that isn't literally true, but helps explain an idea. The city was not literally a dead body rising from a grave, but it felt like one. The word resurgam became the emotional engine of the reconstruction. Wren built the new St. Paul's with a massive dome. It was unlike anything London had seen before. It was wide, high, and filled with clear glass. He moved away from the dark, narrow Gothic style of the past. He used architecture to change the mood of the city. He replaced the feeling of claustrophobia, fear of confined places, with a feeling of awe. This is how art processes catastrophe. It takes the rubble, the broken stones, the burnt wood, and rearranges it into a new shape. The Great Fire destroyed medieval London, but it created the stage for modern London. It forced the city to modernize its streets, its hygiene, and its architecture. The trauma was the catalyst for evolution. A catalyst is something that causes a change or event to happen quickly. But stone and architecture are solid. They last for centuries. What happens when the catastrophe is so vast that it breaks language itself? What happens when the trauma is not just a city burning, but an entire generation being wiped out in the mud? We must now jump forward 2.5 centuries. The year is 1914. The world is entering the industrial age of warfare. The weapons are machines. The scale of death is mechanical. World War I changed everything about how we speak and how we write. Before this war, English poetry about battle was often romantic. It used words like glory, honor, and valor. It treated war like a noble game. But after 1914, those words stopped working. They felt hollow. Hollow means empty inside, having no real value. The reality of the trenches, the gas, the mud, the rats, could not be described with words like glory. English poetry had to break. It had to shatter, just like the world around it. A new group of writers, the war poets, began to use language in a way that was shocking, brutal, and entirely new. They did not paint skeletons dancing. They did not build grand domes. They wrote about the smell of rotting lungs and the sound of men drowning in mud. This shift in tone is one of the most important moments in the English language. It marks the death of idealism and the birth of realism. Idealism is the practice of forming or pursuing ideals, often unrealistically. Realism is the attitude or practice of accepting a situation as it is and being prepared to deal with it. In the next part, we will go into the trenches. We will look at a specific poem that changed how we understand the word patriotic. We will analyze how irony became the dominant tool for modern writers. Irony is when you say one thing but mean the opposite, or when the result of a situation is the opposite of what you expected. Prepare yourself. The fire of London was hot and loud. The trenches of World War I were cold and wet, but the art that came from them is still burning today. We will see how a simple lie in Latin, dulce et decorum est, was dismantled by a young man who saw too much. The air in the trenches of World War I did not smell like victory. It smelled of wet earth, rotting food, and unwashed bodies. It was a place where men lived in the mud like animals. And then there was the sound. A low hiss. A shout of panic. "Gas! Gas! Quick, boys!" Suddenly, the world turned green. The chlorine gas floated across the battlefield like a fog. It was not a battle of swords and bravery. It was a battle of chemistry and suffocation. Suffocation means dying because you cannot breathe. In this environment, the old words of poetry died. Before 1914, British children were taught that war was a noble adventure. They learned Latin phrases in school. One of the most famous was "Dulce et decorum est pro patria mori." This translates to, "It is sweet and fitting to die for one's country." This phrase is an example of propaganda. Propaganda is information, often biased or misleading, used to promote a political cause or point of view. The government used this idea to recruit young men. They promised them glory. They gave them a lie. Wilfred Owen was a young officer in the British Army. He saw the gas attacks. He saw men drowning in their own blood. He realized that the Latin phrase was not just wrong, it was an insult to the suffering of his friends. So, he wrote a poem. He did not write it to celebrate the war. He wrote it to expose the truth. In his poem, also titled Dulce et decorum est, Owen describes a gas attack in terrifying detail. He uses imagery to shock the reader. Imagery is visually descriptive or figurative language. He does not talk about flags or medals. He talks about white eyes writhing and froth-corrupted lungs. He ends the poem by addressing the people at home who cheer for war. He tells them, "If you could hear the blood gurgling from the lungs of a dying man, you would not tell children the old lie, dulce et decorum est pro patria mori." This is the power of irony. Irony is when the literal meaning of the words is the opposite of the actual meaning. By using the "sweet and fitting" title for a poem about vomiting and choking, Owen destroys the old idea of heroism. He forces the reader to taste the bitterness. This moment in history created a feeling of disillusionment. Disillusionment is a feeling of disappointment resulting from the discovery that something is not as good as one believed it to be. A whole generation felt this. The trauma of World War I was too big for the old styles of art. You could not paint a realistic portrait of a general and capture the horror of the trenches. The reality was broken, so the art had to break too. This brings us to a new way of processing trauma: fragmentation. Fragmentation is the process or state of breaking or being broken into small or separate parts. After the war, artists began to show the world as shattered. They stopped trying to make things look nice or orderly, like Christopher Wren's cathedral. They started to paint things that looked confused and jagged. We see this clearly in the rise of modernism. Modernism was a global movement in society and culture that from the early decades of the 20th century sought a new alignment with the experience and values of modern industrial life. In simple terms, the world had changed, so art had to change. But the 20th century was not finished with catastrophe. Just 20 years after the war to end all wars, another conflict began. And this time, the destruction would not just happen in muddy fields. It would come from the sky, raining down on innocent civilians in market towns. In 1937, a small town in the Basque country of Spain was the target of a new military experiment. The town was called Guernica. The German Air Force, supporting the Spanish nationalists, bombed it for hours. It was one of the first times in history that an air force deliberately targeted a civilian population to create terror. When the news reached Paris, the artist Pablo Picasso was furious. He had been asked to paint a mural for an international exhibition. He didn't know what to paint. But when he saw the photos of Guernica in ruins, he knew. He did not paint a realistic picture of airplanes. He did not paint soldiers. He painted the feeling of screaming. In the next part, we will stand in front of Guernica. It is a massive painting, but it has no color. It is only black, white, and gray. We will analyze why Picasso removed the color. We will look at the symbols he used, the bull, the horse, and the light bulb. We will see how he turned a specific event, the bombing of one town, into a universal symbol of suffering. A universal symbol is something that is understood by people everywhere, regardless of their language or culture. Guernica is not just about Spain. It is about every innocent person caught in a war. And we will ask, can a painting actually fight a war? Can art be a weapon? Picasso thought so. He famously said, "Painting is not done to decorate apartments. It is an instrument of war." Get ready to decode the chaos. Imagine standing in front of a wall that is nearly 12 feet high and 25 feet wide. It is massive. It surrounds you. But there is no red blood. There is no blue sky. There is no green grass. Everything is black, white, and grey. This is Guernica. It was painted in 1937, just weeks after the German Condor Legion dropped bombs on a small Spanish market town. It is perhaps the most famous painting of the 20th century. But why did Picasso choose to remove all the color? He did it to mimic the newspapers. In 1937, people did not see the war in high-definition video on their phones. They saw it in grainy, black-and-white photographs in the morning paper. By using this monochromatic palette, Picasso made the painting feel like a documentary record. Monochromatic means containing or using only one color. In this case, the shades of gray make the image feel stark and urgent. But Guernica is not a realistic record. It is abstract. Abstract art does not attempt to represent an accurate depiction of visual reality. Instead, it uses shapes, colors, forms, and gestural marks to achieve its effect. Look closely at the shapes. You see a horse with a spear in its back, screaming in pain. You see a bull standing calmly on the left. You see a woman holding a dead child, her head thrown back in a cry of agony, and above them all, an electric light bulb that looks like an eye. These figures are symbols. A symbol is a mark or character used as a conventional representation of an object, function, or process. The horse represents the innocent people. The bull represents brutality and darkness. The light bulb is the mechanical eye of modern warfare, the technology that allows us to kill from a distance. The painting is not easy to look at. It is visceral. Visceral describes deep inward feelings rather than the intellect. It hits you in the gut. It makes you feel the panic of being trapped in a burning building. The bodies are twisted. The mouths are open. It is the visual equivalent of a scream. Picasso finished the painting quickly. He wanted the world to see it before the anger faded. When the Nazis occupied Paris during World War II, A German officer allegedly visited Picasso's studio. He saw a photograph of Guernica lying on a table. He asked Picasso, "Did you do this?" Picasso replied, "No, you did." This is the power of art as a witness. It takes the responsibility for the violence and places it back on the aggressor. But after 1945, the world changed again. The Second World War ended with two events that were so horrific, they seemed to break the possibility of art entirely: the Holocaust and the atomic bomb. How do you paint a mushroom cloud? How do you write a song about millions of people disappearing into gas chambers? The philosopher Theodor Adorno famously said, "To write poetry after Auschwitz is barbaric." He meant that art, which is usually about beauty or meaning, felt almost insulting in the face of such industrial death. So, how did artists respond? They stopped trying to show the event. They started to show the absence. In the years that followed, we see the rise of the counter-monument. A counter-monument is a memorial that challenges the traditional idea of a monument. Instead of a tall statue of a hero on a horse, artists began to build spaces of emptiness. They built voids. One of the most powerful examples is the Jewish Museum in Berlin. The architect, Daniel Liebeskind, designed the building with a void running through it, an empty space that you cannot enter, but you can see across. It represents the people who are missing. It represents the culture that was cut out of history. This is a concept known as negative space. In art, negative space is the empty space around and between the subject ors of an image. But in history, negative space is the silence left by the dead. We have looked at paintings, we have looked at buildings, but sometimes trauma is not silent. Sometimes it has a rhythm. Sometimes the only way to survive the crushing weight of oppression is to sing. In the next part, we will leave the museums of Europe. We will cross the Atlantic Ocean. We will go to the cotton fields of the American South. We will listen to a sound that was born from the deepest collective trauma in American history: slavery. We will discover how the blues is not just a genre of music. It is a technology for survival. It is a way of taking pain and turning it into something you can carry. We will learn the difference between wallowing in sadness and processing it. Get ready to listen. The music is about to start. The heat in the Mississippi Delta is not like heat anywhere else. It is heavy. It presses down on your shoulders. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, for the African American laborers in the cotton fields, this heat was the backdrop to a life of brutal oppression. They'd been stripped of their names, their religions, and their native languages. The catastrophe here was not a single event, like a fire or a bomb. It was a daily, grinding reality. It was the catastrophe of slavery and its aftermath, the Jim Crow laws. In this environment, silence was dangerous. Silence meant you were thinking, and thinking could get you killed. So, they sang. But they did not sing happy songs to pass the time. They developed a sound that was raw, aching, and honest. We call it the blues. But the blues is not just sad music. That is a common mistake. In English, when we say someone is feeling blue, it means they are sad. But the musical genre of the blues is something more specific. It is a technology for survival. It is a way to take the pain inside you, the trauma, and force it out into the air so it does not destroy you from the inside. This process is called catharsis. Catharsis is the process of releasing and thereby providing relief from strong or repressed emotions. When a blues singer shouts a line about losing his money or his freedom, he is not just complaining. He is performing an act of emotional cleaning. He is saying, "I am suffering, but I am still here to sing about it." The structure of this music tells us a lot about how communities process trauma. The most common form is the call and response. One person sings a line, the call, and the group answers, the response. Or a singer plays a line on the guitar, and his voice answers it. Call and response is a format where a musical phrase is sung by a leader and answered by a chorus. This structure is deeply rooted in African traditions, but in the American South, it took on a new meaning. It meant, "I hear you. You are not alone." In a system designed to isolate people and break their spirits, the simple act of responding to a cry was a revolutionary act of connection. The lyrics of the blues are full of metaphors. We have talked about metaphors before. In the blues, a train is rarely just a machine on tracks. It is a metaphor for escape, for freedom, or for death coming to take you away. The crossroads, where two roads meet, is not just an intersection. It is a place of decision, a crisis point where you must choose between your soul and your survival. The language used in these songs is often vernacular. Vernacular is the language or dialect spoken by the ordinary people in a particular country or region. It is not the Queen's English, it is the English of the earth. It uses double negatives, "I ain't got no money," and slang. For a long time, academics ignored this language. They thought it was broken. But it wasn't broken, it was bending. Just like the musicians bent the notes on their guitars to create that sliding, crying sound, the blue note, they bent the English language to fit their reality. They took the language of their oppressors and made it tell the truth about their suffering. This creates a powerful contrast with the monuments we looked at in London. The monument to the Great Fire is made of stone. It is static. It stands still. The blues is ephemeral. Ephemeral means lasting for a very short time. A song exists only while it is being sung. But because it is passed down from person to person, it becomes durable. It travels. The blues traveled north. It went to Chicago. It went to Detroit. It plugged into electricity. And it gave birth to jazz, rock and roll, and soul. The trauma of the cotton fields became the foundation of American culture. This is a profound irony. The people who were treated as property created the art that defined the nation. But music does not just heal the past. Sometimes it predicts the future. As the 20th century moved into the 1960s, the call and response moved from the church and the juke joint into the streets. We'll see how the soundtrack of trauma turned into an anthem of resistance. We will look at how a simple song, "We Shall Overcome," became a shield against water cannons and police dogs. We will analyze the word anthem. An anthem is a rousing or uplifting song identified with a particular group, body, or cause. How does a song become an anthem? How does a melody give people the courage to walk into danger? And we will see what happens when the government tries to silence the song. We will discover that you can burn a painting and you can bomb a building, but you cannot arrest a melody. The water cannons were strong enough to strip the bark off a tree. The police dogs were snarling. The jail cells were small and crowded. But in Birmingham, Alabama, in 1963, the sound coming from the streets was not a scream of terror. It was a melody. It was a slow, steady hymn. We shall overcome. This moment marks the transformation of the call and response into an anthem. An anthem is a rousing or uplifting song identified with a particular group, body, or cause. It is different from the blues. The blues is personal. It is about my pain. An anthem is collective. It is about our strength. When people sing together, something biological happens. Their breathing synchronizes. Their heart rates can even align. This creates a physical feeling of solidarity. Solidarity is unity or agreement of feeling or action, especially among individuals with a common interest. In the face of violence, singing created a wall of sound that the water cannons could not break. The lyrics of We Shall Overcome are simple. We are not afraid. The truth shall make us free. In English, we call these declarative sentences. A declarative sentence makes a statement or expresses an opinion. It states a fact. By singing We Are Not Afraid while facing a police dog, the protesters were not just describing their feelings. They were creating their reality. They were speaking courage into existence. This is the power of language in a crisis. It frames the event. If you scream, you are a victim. If you sing, you are a warrior. But while the civil rights movement was using audio to fight oppression at home, a different kind of trauma was happening thousands of miles away. It was happening in a jungle in Vietnam. And this time, the medium of memory was not a song. It was a camera. The Vietnam War is often called the first television war. For the first time in history, the trauma was beamed directly into living rooms every night. But amidst thousands of hours of footage, one static image changed the world. It is June 8, 1972. A South Vietnamese plane accidentally drops napalm on a village. A photographer named Nick Ut is standing on the road. He sees a group of children running through the smoke. In the center is a 9-year-old girl, naked, her skin burning. He raises his Leica camera. He clicks the shutter. That split second captured a literal record. The camera does not lie about the light it sees, but the image became a cultural response. It became the definition of the war's horror. In English, we describe such an image as iconic. Iconic means widely recognized and well established. An icon originally referred to a religious painting, but in modern English, it means a person or thing that represents something of great importance. This photo became the icon of innocent suffering. Why was it so powerful? Because it stripped away the political rhetoric. Rhetoric is the art of effective or persuasive speaking or writing. The politicians spoke of containment and strategy. The photo spoke of burning skin. It cut through the abstract language of war and forced the viewer to confront the physical reality. This leads us to a difficult concept: desensitization. Desensitization is the process of reducing sensitivity, especially to painful or distressing stimuli. When we see too many images of war, we can become numb. We stop feeling the shock. But Nick Ut's photo broke through the numbness. It was too raw to ignore. It is a perfect example of how visual art, even a news photograph, can bypass the brain and hit the heart. The girl in the photo, Kim Phuc, survived. She eventually became a symbol of resilience. Resilience, as we learned, is the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. But for decades, she was trapped by that image. She was the girl in the picture. The trauma was frozen in time. This is the danger of the literal record. It traps the victim in their worst moment forever. A painting like Guernica interprets the pain, turning it into art. A photograph preserves the pain exactly as it was. As we moved into the late 20th century, the speed of information increased. We went from paintings that took months to finish, to photos that took days to develop, to live broadcasts that happened instantly. But on a clear Tuesday morning in September 2001, the world witnessed a catastrophe that was both instantly visible and impossible to comprehend. The trauma of 9/11 was watched by millions in real time. And in the silence that followed the collapse of the towers, a new struggle for meaning began. In the next part, we will walk into the dust of New York City. We will look at the impromptu shrines that appeared on fences. We will analyze the missing posters. These were not art, and they were not news. They were something else. They were a desperate attempt to use language to find the lost. We will see how the English language struggled to describe the event. We will look at words like ground zero and the pile. We will see how a tragedy creates its own vocabulary and how ordinary people become the curators of history. The sky over New York City on the morning of September 11th, 2001, was a specific shade of blue. It was severe clear. Pilots use this term when there are no clouds and visibility is unlimited. By 10:30 a.m., that blue was gone. It was replaced by a gray cloud of dust, paper, and pulverized concrete. When the towers fell, the city did not just lose 2 buildings. It lost its sense of direction. For decades, New Yorkers had used the Twin Towers to know where south was. Now, there was only a hole in the skyline. In the hours and days that followed, something unprecedented happened on the fences and walls of the city. People began to tape up sheets of paper. "Missing," they said. "Have you seen him?" "She was on the 104th floor." These were not official government notices. They were personal pleas. Thousands of these posters covered the city. They created a collage of faces. But this was a collage born of desperation. It was an impromptu memorial. This brings us to a specific type of cultural response: the vigil. A vigil is a period of keeping awake during the time usually spent asleep. The city became one giant vigil. The posters were the evidence that people were still looking, still hoping. The site of the collapse was quickly given a name: Ground Zero. Originally, this term was a military definition. It meant the point on the Earth's surface directly above or below an exploding nuclear bomb. By applying this word to Lower Manhattan, the public was using a metaphor to describe the scale of the destruction. It felt like a nuclear event. It felt like the center of an explosion that had shattered the world. Another term emerged: the pile. The rescue workers did not call it the ruins. They called it the pile. This word sounds heavy. It sounds messy. It reflects the physical reality of the twisted steel. It is a euphemism in reverse. A euphemism usually makes something sound nicer, like saying passed away instead of died. The pile made it sound raw and industrial. But how do you build a monument to a tragedy that is still happening? The missing posters were rain-soaked and fading. They were ephemeral, lasting for a very short time. The city needed something that would last, but they were not ready for stone. The wound was too fresh. 6 months later, artists and architects created a solution that was pure light. They installed 88 massive searchlights near the site. They pointed them straight up. The beams of light mimicked the shape of the Twin Towers. This piece was called The Tribute in Light. It is a masterpiece of the intangible. Intangible means unable to be touched, not having physical presence. You can put your hand through the light, and you feel nothing. But when you look at it from miles away, it looks solid. It represents the memory of the towers. They are gone, but they are still there in our minds. This marks a major shift in the history of memory. We moved from the heavy stone of the Great Fire of London to the light of New York. We moved from permanent structures to temporary experiences. The tribute in light is only turned on once a year. It is a monument that sleeps. Why is this shift important? Because it reflects how we process trauma in the modern world. We are moving faster. We are less attached to physical things and more attached to images and feelings. But the most significant change after 9/11 was not the light. It was the internet. For the first time, a global catastrophe was processed online. People did not just talk to their neighbors. They typed their fears into blogs and forums. They created a digital archive. The internet allowed the trauma to be shared instantly across the world. But it also allowed something else to spread: conspiracy, anger, and division. The cultural response became fragmented. There was no single story anymore. There were millions of threads. This digital fragmentation brings us to the edge of the present day. We live in a time where every disaster is recorded on a smartphone. We have too much memory. We have terabytes of tragedy. How do we cope when the flood of information never stops? We are about to enter the era of the pandemic and the screen. We will see how a virus that forced us to stay apart actually created a new kind of art, one that happened in isolation, yet connected us all. In the next part, we will look at the balconies of Italy. We will hear the violins played from windows. We will analyze the phrase social distancing, a term that is an oxymoron. How can we be social if we are distant? We will discover that in the quietest moments of the 21st century, the oldest human instinct returned. We did not build statues. We did not paint murals. We just opened the window and made a noise. In March 2020, the noise of the modern world stopped again. Just like in 1348 during the Black Death, the markets closed. The streets were empty. But this time, the silence was different. It was not the silence of a lack of information. It was the silence of a pause button being pressed on the entire global economy. We were told to do something that sounded impossible. We were told to practice social distancing. For an English learner, this phrase is fascinating because it is an oxymoron. Social implies being together, interacting, and connecting. Distancing implies staying apart, isolating, and separating. To be socially distant is a linguistic contradiction. It creates a tension in the mind. And yet, in that tension, a new kind of art was born. It did not happen in a museum or a gallery. It happened on the balconies of Italy. Picture a narrow street in Rome. The shutters are open. A man stands on his small balcony with a violin. Across the street, a woman leans out of her window. She begins to sing. They are physically separated by 30 feet of air, but the sound connects them. This phenomenon was not just music, it was a desperate attempt to bridge the gap. We call this solidarity. The virus tried to isolate the human host, but the human spirit found a workaround. We used sound waves to touch each other when our hands could not. In New York City, this took a louder form. Every evening at 7 p.m., people would open their windows and clap, bang pots and pans, and cheer. They were cheering for the essential workers, the nurses and doctors. But they were also cheering to prove they were still alive. This became a daily ritual. This ritual was secular, non-religious, but it served the same purpose as a church bell. It marked the time. It said, "We survived another day." However, the most significant shift in how we processed this collective trauma happened on our screens. Since we could not gather in public squares, the internet became the new public square. But the internet is not made of stone. It is made of code. It is fluid. We saw the rise of the Zoom choir. Hundreds of people recorded themselves singing alone in their bedrooms. Then, a video editor stitched all the squares together into one massive grid. The result was a composite. The sound of a Zoom choir is beautiful, but it is also strange. It is an illusion. The singers never actually heard each other in real time. They were singing to a click track in their headphones. This is a perfect metaphor for the pandemic era. We were together, alone. The word we heard most often during these years was unprecedented. News anchors said it every day. These are unprecedented times. But if you look back at our history, at the plague of 1348, at the flu of 1918, you realize that pandemics are actually quite precedented. They happen. What was truly new was our ability to share our anxiety instantly. This constant sharing created a new problem: doom scrolling. Doom scrolling is the act of spending an excessive amount of time reading large quantities of negative news online. In the past, you read the newspaper once a day. In 2020, you checked the infection numbers every hour. This overload of information changed the tone of our cultural response. It became frantic. It became exhausted. We did not have time to process the grief because the next headline was already there. In the past, art took time. Ren took years to design St. Paul's. Picasso took weeks to paint Guernica. But in the digital age, the response is immediate. A meme is created seconds after an event. A hashtag trends within minutes. This speed comes at a cost. We are losing the space for deep reflection. If everything is recorded, nothing is special. If every moment is an historic event, then history becomes a blur. We have now traveled from the silent, painted skeletons of the Middle Ages to the noisy, digital grids of the 21st century. We have seen how humanity uses art to fight back against death. We have seen that whether it is a stone column or a viral video, the purpose is the same. To say, we were here. We mattered. But there is one final question we must answer. We have looked at how we remember the past. But what about the future? How will the next generation read the scars we are leaving today? Will they understand our memes? Will they understand our silence? In the next part, we will look at the concept of legacy. Legacy is what a person or generation leaves behind for those who come after. We will look at how modern artists are trying to build monuments that last for 10,000 years. We will look at the clock of the long now. We will discuss the difference between ephemeral, short-lived, and enduring, long-lasting. And we will ask, in a world of digital noise, is it even possible to write something in stone anymore? Deep inside a hollowed-out mountain in West Texas, a giant machine is being built. It is hundreds of feet tall. It is made of stainless steel, titanium, and ceramic. It is designed to run for 10,000 years without human intervention. This is the clock of the long now. It ticks only once a year. The century hand advances once every 100 years. And the cuckoo comes out only once every millennium. Why would anyone build such a thing? In an age of instant notifications and 24-hour news cycles, this clock seems absurd. But that is the point. It is an artistic rebellion against the speed of modern trauma. It is a monument to long-term thinking. Most of the responses to catastrophe we have looked at so far have been reactive. Reactive means acting in response to a situation. The plague struck, so they painted skeletons. The fire burned, so they built a column. The bomb dropped, so they took a photo. These are immediate, emotional responses to pain. But the clock of the long now is proactive. Proactive means creating or controlling a situation by causing something to happen. The builders are asking, what if civilization collapses? What if we lose our technology? What will remain? This brings us to the concept of stewardship. Stewardship is the job of supervising or taking care of something, such as an organization or property. In this context, it means taking care of the future of humanity. It suggests that we do not own the world, we are just looking after it. For the people who will live here in the year 5000. Another example of this future-proofing is the Svalbard Global Seed Vault in Norway. It is buried deep in the permafrost of the Arctic. It contains millions of seeds from every crop on Earth. If a nuclear war or a climate catastrophe wipes out our agriculture, the survivors can go to this vault and restart civilization. This is a literal record of nature. It is not a painting of a flower. It is the genetic code of the flower itself. It is the ultimate backup plan. But seeds and gears are physical. What about language? What about the stories we tell? When we look back at the Black Death or the Great Fire, we read the history in English or Latin. We assume the future will understand us. But languages die. Meanings change. The word awful used to mean full of awe or inspiring wonder. Now it means very bad. If a person from the future reads that the pandemic was awful, will they think we were impressed by it? This is the challenge of intergenerational communication. To speak to the future, we have to use symbols that are universal. We have to go back to the beginning. We have to go back to the skeletons and the stars. The clock of the long now uses a chime generator that will never play the same melody twice in 10,000 years. It is a mathematical song. Math is a language that does not change. A triangle is always a triangle. And this connects us back to the pattern interrupts we discussed. The clock is a pattern interrupt for the human race. It forces us to stop doom scrolling. It forces us to look up from our phones and think about deep time. Deep time is the concept of geological time, which is vast and difficult for the human mind to grasp. When you stand next to a machine that will outlive your great-great-great-grandchildren, your personal stress feels smaller. The traffic jam, the rude comment online, the daily anxiety, it all shrinks. This is a form of perspective. Art and monuments give us this perspective. They pull us out of the trap of the now. Throughout this series, we have seen that humans have a unique ability. We do not just suffer, we transmute suffering. Transmute means to change in form, nature, or substance. We turn the lead of trauma into the gold of meaning. We took the silence of the plague and turned it into the dance macabre. We took the heat of the fire and turned it into St. Paul's Cathedral. We took the horror of the trenches and turned it into the poetry of Wilfred Owen. We took the oppression of the fields and turned it into the blues. We took the isolation of the virus and turned it into a balcony concert. We are meaning-making machines. But what happens when the machine stops? What is the final lesson of all this history? In the final part, we will bring everything together. We will return to the image of the dancing skeletons. We will summarize the key English concepts: allegory, motif, tone, metaphor, resilience, stewardship. I will give you the ultimate tool for reading history. It is a single question you can ask whenever you see a monument. It is the key to unlocking the difference between what happened and what it means. Get ready to close the loop. The clock is ticking. We began this journey in a silent city. We stood before a wall painted with skeletons in 1348. We end our journey in a gallery of the mind, looking back at everything we have seen. The skeletons are still dancing. The fire of London is still burning in the stone of the monument. The scream of Guernica is still echoing. The blues are still playing. The light of the Twin Towers is still shining. These are not just history lessons. They are chapters in a single long story about how humans survive. Throughout this series, we have built a vocabulary to understand this story. We learned about allegory, using symbols to tell a hidden truth. We learned about motif, the recurring patterns like the call and response. We learned about tone, the difference between the romantic glory of old war poetry and the bitter irony of the trenches. We learned about metaphors, how a city can be a phoenix rising from the ashes. And most importantly, we learned the difference between a literal record and a cultural response. A literal record is a list of the dead. A cultural response is a song that makes the living feel less alone. Now, I want to give you the final tool. It is a question you should ask every time you walk into a museum. Watch the news or scroll through your phone. When you see an image of tragedy, ask yourself, is this a mirror or is it a shield? Let me explain. Some art acts as a mirror. It reflects the brutal reality exactly as it is. The photo of the girl in Vietnam is a mirror. It forces us to look at our own violence. It uses realism to shock us into action. Other art acts as a shield. The Danse Macabre was a shield. It took the terrifying reality of the plague and turned it into a cartoon. It protected the people from despair by giving them a way to laugh at death. The social distancing concerts on the balconies were shields. They protected us from the crushing silence of isolation. As an advanced English learner, being able to spot this distinction is powerful. It allows you to analyze the intent of the creator. Intent is the intention or purpose, what the creator meant to do. Was the artist trying to hurt you with the truth, mirror, or heal you with a story, shield? We live in a world that is loud with trauma. We have 24-hour news cycles. We have instant updates on every disaster. It is easy to feel overwhelmed. It is easy to feel that everything is falling apart. But history tells us a different story. It tells us that we are resilient. Resilience is not just bouncing back, it is growing back differently. London grew back from the fire with wider streets and stronger stone. Art grew back from the trenches with a sharper, more honest voice. America grew back from the fields of slavery with a music that changed the world. We do not just endure catastrophe, we transmute it. We change the form of the pain. We turn it into meaning. So, the next time you feel the weight of a collective trauma, whether it is a global pandemic, a political crisis, or a personal loss, remember the lesson of the steward. You are the steward of your own memory. You get to decide what to build from the rubble. Will you build a wall of anger, or will you build a cathedral of light? Will you write a list of what you lost, or will you sing a song about what you found? The history of English art and literature is a history of people choosing to sing, from the medieval monks to the jazz musicians to the digital choirs. The message is the same. We are still here. We are still dancing. The silence of the universe is vast, but our voices are louder. Keep listening, keep reading, and keep making meaning.